Hello everybody, I would like to share with you super fun sideline of a Modern Scandinavian Defense. I use this opening all the time and I have great success with this. I think on chess.com I have around 80% win rate with this attack, and it's super easy to learn and execute a very funny trap which most of the time white will fall for on a beginner and intermediate level. If you are on a top level, then this video may not be for you, as white is not going to fall for the trap, of course. But if you open Lichess database and follow the top played moves by white in this line, most of the players are actually falling for a quite easy trap. So let's have a look at this. White goes e4 and we respond with d5, the Scandinavian defense. Most of the time white takes the pawn and we attack it with our knight to f6. Now the top played move by white, which is not the most accurate one, but usually they play knight to c3, trying to support the pawn in the center, but of course we already attack it with our queen and knight, so we are able to capture, and after this white usually captures the knight and we get to recapture with our queen. Alright, so in this position, the top two most commonly played moves by white are knight to f3 and d4, and this is once again exactly what we want. So let's say d4, we bring our knight to c6, and then usually knight to f3 is what happens. This position has been already reached more than 80,000 times, and pretty much everybody here is going for bishop to g4, which is a perfectly fine move, engine's top choice. However, I'm going to recommend a different move, a very rare move that only 0.4% of the players play, but it gets the highest win rate of 69%. And the move is knight to b4. So what is the big idea behind this move, you ask? Well, obviously, the idea is to use your dark-haired lady alongside the horse to launch a devastating attack. Actually, that's why I call it the Xena attack. To briefly explain, we are already threatening to go queen to e4 check, and afterwards knight to c2, forking the king and the rook. And there is actually not a convenient way for white to deal with this threat and not lose any material. There is one line that Stockfish says is the best line for white as a defense against this threat, and this is just hilarious because nobody plays in such a way. So the Stockfish says white needs to go a3, gets checked, and then just develop the king to d2, covering the c2 square, and Stockfish says white is fine and actually slightly better. Well, nobody plays this way. There are only 9 games that reach this position, and actually 7 of them white lost because the king is so funny on c2 square, you know, blocking its own pieces and never going to castle and stuff like that. So what everybody seems to be doing after the Xena attack and knight to b4 is to play, actually to blunder, if I have to put it this way. The top played move is pawn to c3, trying to kick away our knight. Well, after that, our queen is coming to e4 with check, and most of the players will simply blunder to this simple tactic and they will try to block this check. And it doesn't matter if they block it with the light square bishop or the dark square bishop or the queen. All these 3 moves are losing blunders, because after that we are able to come to the c2 square and fork the knight, for the king and the rook, and that's what we actually wanted to achieve with this opening, and we can congratulate ourselves for doing this. So after the king moves somewhere, we can take this rook for free, and technically it's not really for free because white will be able to recapture the knight, but that doesn't change the fact that the position is winning for black, and I would recommend not trying hard to save the knight, but rather focus on development, try to push this pawn to prevent any counterplay for this knight, then maybe e5, develop light square bishop, long castle, and crush white. Actually, the correct move that white needs to play after getting checked is to move their king to d2, which not really everybody likes to do. They prefer to blunder, you know. But even if they find this move and they move to the king to d2, you can now choose, you can either force a draw with a repetition of these moves, but you don't have to, and I would suggest that you don't, and you can rather retreat your knight to d5 and, you know, finish development and create some attack and crush white, because the white king is just so funny on the d2 square. So that was the c3 move. Let's go back. The second most played move is pawn to c4. So trying to harass our queen pointlessly, as our queen wanted to move anyways to the e4 square and check. And now all the same trick still works. If white choose to block this check with any of these three pieces, they will be losing the rook. And if they now try to move the king to d2, well, in this position this doesn't even work. We can simply play bishop to f5, which is a strong response. And now, well, what can they do? In one of my games on chess.com, my opponent tried this counterplay and went queen a4 check, and it looks good. It looks nice. I had to block it with my knight as it was hanging, and then they continued with d5, so attacking my pinned knight, so it seems like I will be losing material, and yeah, indeed I will, but they are going to be losing something more. So I went for e6 because I was prepared in this line and I knew this was the best continuation and the knight cannot really be taken. Well, white foolishly captured my knight, but now the rook is free to come to d8 with check. The only place the king can go to is c3. Now there is a really funny, savage and sadistic move. Try to find it and I bet you will fail, but the best move for black here is pawn to b5. And there is literally nothing white can do about having their queen attacked. So the queen cannot take the pawn because queen to c2 is now checkmate. And the pawn cannot take pawn because white will simply hang their queen. If white tries to be smart and move the queen out of danger while staying in touch with the c2 square, now we can push this pawn to b4 with check. The only legal move is to capture this pawn with the queen and they get checkmated. So, as you can see, pawn to c4 is actually already a losing mistake by white. So the third most played move is actually the correct move, pawn to a3. But after queen to e4, once again everybody seems to be blundering and blocking this check with their bishops and their queens, and nobody is willing to play king to d2. So as I mentioned, only 9 people played this move out of the more than 300 times that this opening was played, and 7 of them failed to failed. So then the fourth most played move in this position is bishop to d2, which is by far the worst according to Stockfish, because now after this check white doesn't have an option to go king d2, as now the square is occupied by the dark square bishop, and they simply need to fall for our tactic of knight to c2 fork. And what else? The fifth top played move is pawn to b3, trying to, you know, Fianchetto the dark square bishop. But this move is also a blunder, and once again we are going to give this check, and they cannot block it because of the old tactics, and now king to d2 can be met successfully with bishop to f5, and you know the position is crushing. So then there is the sixth top played move, which finally makes some sense in my opinion, and that is to play bishop to e2. and prevent our queen from checking the white king. Well, but we can now still, oops, that was a misclick. We can still go queen to e4. And now the best thing white can do is to castle. They need to get the king out of the middle so the knight cannot check him from the c2 square. And now we can win at least a pawn. So our queen takes on c2, and actually white cannot exchange queens, even though I can imagine most of the players would just simply exchange queens. The best move for white here is pawn to d5. Don't ask me why, that's stockfish opinion. But if they exchange the queens, you know, we get some tempi on the rook, so the rook needs to move. And well, I haven't analyzed this deeply yet, but stockfish says it's winning for black, so I will trust him on this one. That's pretty much all I wanted to share with you about this opening. Maybe one last thing. This whole sequence and combination of attacking with the queen and the knight can actually work even in totally different variations. So for example, here white would play knight to f3, we go knight to c6, and many times players against me play this b3, so trying to unleash the dark square bishop. Well, guess what? You can still go knight to b4 and get them in the same trap. So for example, I don't know, they go bishop b2, boom, queen to e4 check. And now they need to block this check and they will get hit with the knight to c2 and they will lose the rook. Or most often in my games, players try to go for this bishop to c4 to harass my queen, but then once again queen to e4, and now if they block this check, they are losing the rook, and if they move the king to f1, they not only lose the pawn, they also lose the castling rights, and this is winning for black once again. And there is this line, which is my personal favorite, and that's when they go b3 right away. Here you go queen to e5 and you pick up this rook without all the hard work. So that's it guys, thanks for watching, take care and bye.